Angry, I tried to walk away, but Lawrence reached out and held me in place and wouldn't let me leave, and so I elbowed him in the nose, and then when he was stunned, I kicked him as hard as I could between the legs and left, and went over to my father's house. Hi there, my name is Kami, and my husband Lawrence is the cheapest man on the planet. Now I know how that sounds. Some of you don't believe me while the others are questioning why I would stay with him since I know that he is so cheap. But he wasn't always like this. When we first started dating, he was frugal, but he was much more reasonable. Like he would cut out coupons from the flyers that would come to our home and use them to get discounts on things. It was kind of nice, actually, as he managed to get us some pretty good deals sometimes. He was also really good at bargaining, and when it came time buying big-ticket items, he was always the kind of person that you wanted to negotiate for you. When we bought our first car together, he had somehow managed to convince the dealership to not only give us a free spare set of tires, but had them knock off an extra $3,000 off the price. I still have no idea how he did it, but he did. It was because of stuff like that that made me not mind that he was cheap so much. Sometimes he went overboard, but it also sometimes came in handy. I would often wonder how he had become so concerned with money, and he told me that when he was a child that his family was dirt poor, and that he vowed that he would never allow himself to have to live through that ever again, and had become money savvy in order to make sure he kept his vow. That is until one day when I sent him shopping with a long list of items that we really needed, and he came home with nearly nothing. Lawrence, I sent you to buy groceries. You were gone for over 4 hours and you barely bought anything. What happened?
Well, I got there and everything just cost too much money. Can you believe what they expect you to pay for some things?
Yeah, but you could have bought the store brand items. That would have saved some money. Where is the toothpaste or shampoo?
Those are some of the most expensive things. They had to go.
But we need them, Lawrence. What are we supposed to do without them?
Don't worry. There was a huge sale on hand soap. We'll just use that.
I just stared at him in disbelief. He actually expected me to brush my teeth with hand soap. Using it on my hair was bad enough, but to put that goop in my mouth was a step too far. I went to the store and bought all the things that he didn't buy, and when I got home, we had a huge fight. It was the first time in our marriage that we had fought like that, and afterwards he apologized and said that he wasn't sure what had gotten into him that made him make such odd choices. For a while, he got back to his normal routine. He would still be a bit cheap, but he didn't make any more crazy purchases. So, at the time, I just thought that it was a one-off occurrence, although I worried about what could have caused it. After all, maybe something could trigger it again and then who knows what he might do. Sadly, I would find out all too soon. There was a really bad flu going around, and even though I tried my best to avoid catching it, I unfortunately encountered someone that had it and caught it. It was absolutely awful. I was coughing constantly, and my fever was incredibly high. Between coughs and the throbbing of my headache, I begged Lawrence to go and get me some painkillers. I needed something to help get my fever down, and I was afraid that if I didn't, that I would need to go to the hospital. However, I was in no shape to go to the pharmacy, and Lawrence was too cheap to pay for the delivery fee for them to bring the medication out to us. But thankfully, Lawrence promised that he would take care of it and grabbed the car keys and went out. I'm not really sure how long he was gone for, as I was drifting in and out of being conscious. Suddenly, Lawrence showed up and offered me some pills. I was desperate, and so I didn't even look at them and just swallowed them with some water. 4 hours later, my fever was just as bad, and I was beginning to get concerned. Lawrence, however, promised that the medication would begin to work soon. He was my husband, and so I trusted him and took the pills. After I did, he walked around the room and checked the garbage pails. It was so confusing to me until he spoke.
You're using a lot of tissues. You know those things aren't cheap, right?
Lawrence, I'm sick. I can barely stay awake. If I need to use them, I will.
Well, maybe you can try to limit yourself to how many you use, or reuse them more than once. We aren't made of money, Kami.
I just ignored him, and eventually I think that he thought that I had fallen asleep. But before he left the room, he took the box of tissues with him so that I couldn't use any more of them. Not long after that, however, my stomach began to hurt, and I could feel my fever worsening. It was so bad that I began to hallucinate, but I was lucid enough to beg my husband to take me to the hospital, but he just kept saying all I needed to do was take more medication. Reluctantly, I did, but after I swallowed the pills, I went and hid in the bathroom and called my father. Dad, can you please come and take me to the hospital?
Kami, of course I can. Is everything okay? What about Lawrence?
Lawrence is here, but he just thinks I need to take this medication that he bought, and I think it's just making things worse. I have a terrible flu and my fever is dangerously high.
I will be there in 5 minutes.
I left the bathroom and went and sat on the porch until my father arrived. Honestly, though, I had no idea what time that he showed up, though, as I passed out, and then woke up in a hospital bed with a bunch of tubes going into my arms. I could hear some beeping sounds of the machines around me and the shuffling around of people's feet. Looking around, I saw Lawrence sulking in the corner. He had a black eye, a split lip, and sever cuts and scrapes on his face. Lawrence? What happened to me and what happened to you?
It's your fault.
What do you mean? Why am I in a hospital bed?
Your stupid father attacked me after he took you here. Why did you call him?
Because my fever was getting worse. Lawrence was so upset that he stormed out of the room. An hour went by and my father came in and told me that he found me passed out on the porch and he rushed me to the hospital. The doctors there demanded to know what medication I had been taking and my father couldn't tell them, but as it turned out, it was some kind of knockoff brand that was sold essentially by a drug dealer. It cost next to nothing and my husband had bought it to save a few dollars. Well, his plan backfired and the drugs that he had bought had caused my kidneys to shut down. If my father hadn't taken me to the hospital, I would have died. Thankfully, they were able to flush the drugs out of my system and put me on medication that finally brought my fever down and helped me fight off the flu. Okay, but why is Lawrence all beat up though?
After the doctors told me that it was the medication that Lawrence gave you that almost killed you, I lost it and attacked him. He promised not to press charges, so long as we don't press charges against him for the medication.
I was furious with Lawrence. This was now the second time that his being cheap negatively affected our marriage. And on top of it all, I nearly died as well. When I felt well enough, I called Lawrence and demanded that he apologize for what he did, and that if he didn't, that I would divorce him. It must have scared him enough because he apologized like I had never seen anyone do before. He spent the next months nursing me back to health and apologizing to me every day for what he had done to me. Once again, I thought that that would be the last time that that behavior would rear its ugly head, but boy was I wrong. The months passed and we eventually got back into our old routine, at least until I began to feel sick every morning. It didn't take long for me to figure out that I was pregnant, and even though we weren't trying, I was still very excited, and I ran to tell Lawrence. I was a bit concerned that he wouldn't be on board with the idea, but he was just as excited as I was, and instantly began to think up baby names and how we would eventually take our child on family road trips. I felt completely at ease and happy that Lawrence saw this as a blessing just as much as I did. That quickly changed, though, when we began to go to classes that would help us get ready for the birth of our baby. The classes were great and informative, but they mentioned how much it would cost to deliver a baby in a hospital, and I saw an odd glimmer in Lawrence's eyes when he heard that. The expression that he had on his face worried me greatly. A few weeks later, I came home to find Lawrence in the living room with a bunch of packages around him. Among them were a small, inflatable kiddie pool, some small towels, and several bottles of hand sanitizer. What is all this stuff?
This is for the delivery. I looked into it, and you can deliver your baby at home with stuff like this and save a lot of money.
Lawrence, what are you talking about? All I see are things you could get from the dollar store. You can't possibly think that this is a good idea to deliver a baby using this garbage?
All of this cost less than a fraction of what the hospital would cost. I've watched a bunch of videos online, and I know what I'm doing. We can do a home birth. It will work out.
But with a home birth, you would still need people, like a doula or even a nurse. Did you even think to hire such a person? Also, none of this will be enough for a delivery. That pool is way too small. And what is all the hand sanitizer for?
To clean you and the baby once it comes out. This will save us so much money.
You can't be serious. This is a recipe for disaster. This will kill me and our baby, but you don't even care just because you can save a few dollars? That was it. That was the last straw. It was bad enough that he had nearly killed me because he was so incredibly cheap, but now he was endangering our baby. And even if the delivery went well, I suddenly realized that the child would have a lifetime of potential issues because of this man. Angry, I tried to walk away, but Lawrence reached out and held me in place and wouldn't let me leave. and so I elbowed him in the nose, and then when he was stunned, I kicked him as hard as I could between the legs and left, and went over to my father's house. Unfortunately, he was not surprised to see me and welcomed me into his home. Within weeks, I filed for divorce. I wanted to get all of the trials over and done with before I had the baby, and thankfully my lawyer made sure that it happened. The judge looked over what had transpired over the course of our marriage and granted me sole custody of our baby, as it was plainly obvious that Lawrence was unhinged and made decisions that would endanger the lives of other people. The judge also granted me a large amount of child support and alimony for the same reasons. But since we only rented the home we lived in, the judge decided to let Lawrence continue to live there. I instead lived with my father, and after I gave birth to my daughter, it turned out to be the best place for me, as my father would look after her while I eventually went back to work. Once the divorce was completely settled, things really worked out for me. I lived with my father for a few years, but eventually I did meet someone else, and while he is far from perfect, he is nevertheless perfect for me and for my daughter as well. And Lawrence? Well, he never married again. In fact, he never dated again, as it cost too much money. As far as I can tell, he lives in an assisted living home as he began to lose his mind after we got divorced. He began to stop bathing as he saw it as an unnecessary expense. As if that wasn't bad enough, he began to eat only noodles as he thought that they were the cheapest and most cost-effective food, and as such, he began to gain a lot of weight. I'm actually surprised that he is still alive, to be honest. I do feel bad that he has gone so far downhill, but I also count my blessings as well that I was able to get out before he did. I honestly don't think that things would have gone differently for him whether I was in his life or not. The only difference, I think, was that he would have taken me down with him. You can disagree with me, though, and I honestly wonder what you think.